Hello, welcome to Ahval TV. We have today very special guest, distinguished Ambassador Robert Pearson. Robert Pearson is currently a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute, but Ambassador Pearson served as a U.S. ambassador to Turkey from 2000 to 2003, and he has been a very influential voice over the Turkish-U.S. relations. Welcome to the Ahval TV, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let me start my first question. Obviously, it is the American airstrikes to Syria over the weekend. What do you think, whether these strikes made any difference between at the relations, and whether the strikes have shown us anything between the Turkish-Russia Iranian axis versus the Western bloc?
I think it could make a difference. I'm glad that the U.S., the U.K., and France made this strike. I was happy to see the Turkish support for it. I think that it was a big mistake for Assad to conduct a chemical weapons strike within days after President Trump said the U.S. was leaving Syria. That was a sign of such arrogance that it almost forced the U.S. and others to respond. I think that the U.S. and Turkey still have their major issue to contend with, and that is, what is the relationship with the Kurds? What is the relationship with the peace process? What is the relationship of the peace process the Turks are currently involved in with the Geneva process? So I think that most of the items on the agenda are still there. Assad may have been temporarily intimidated by these strikes. They certainly would have affected the Iranian perception of American capabilities. Russians are happy that they weren't forced to respond, but in essence, it doesn't really change the picture or the course of the war as we see it today.
Just today, you mentioned about the Kurds, the relations with the Kurds. Obviously, there are two ways: the U.S. Partnership with the Syrian Kurds, as well as Turkey's relations with the Syrian Kurds. Today there was a news on Wall Street Journal saying that there will be new Arab force in Syria. But in general, what is your expectation from U.S. Partnership with Syrian Kurds, as whether Syrian Democratic Forces or the YPG going forward?
Well, the narrative, in 2013 and 2014 was that when ISIS surged into Syria, and ISIS, recall, attacked the Kurds. It wasn't the other way around. The Yazidis are Kurds, and ISIS enslaved their women, beheaded their men, recruited their children for armies, and no one helped them. Turkey decided not to help them. They asked the U.S. for help. The U.S. said they would help them. We all remember Kobani. We remember that over a period of 4 or 5 months, a town of about 50,000 people was besieged by ISIS. Winning that town would have been an enormous victory for them. It was the U.S. that helped the Kurds in Kobani push ISIS back. So it would be really helpful if Turkey would understand that those Kurds who fought for their lives, for their wives and their children, have some form of a right to self-defense. It doesn't seem to me to be impossible to imagine that kind of accommodation, and that Turkey and the U.S. could work together along that northern border to ensure security for Turkey, an obligation the U.S. recognizes and which I feel confident would be willing to work on. So I do think there are ways in which Turkey and the U.S. can accommodate this reality without making it a kind of zero-sum game, which is not going to help us either reach a resolution or bring peace to Syria.
It looks like though Ankara is presenting this either work with Ankara or work with Syrian Kurds, and we have seen the Turkish takeover of Afrin. But you think that the U.S. can work both the Syrian Kurds as well as NATO ally Turkey?
I think they can, but Turkey, it depends on Turkey's willingness. Turkey went to Afrin basically with Russian permission. And Russia is the strongest ally of Damascus, which Turkey seems to still oppose. So the Turks are in Syria at the permission of the Russians, who would like nothing better than to put the Turks and the Americans at each other's throats over events in Syria. So I think that when you look at what are a number of contradictions in the Turkish position, there is a great deal of room for cooperation with the United States. And I've said this before and say it again, and I'll continue to say it. Our two countries' national interests argue for an accommodation that provides for Turkish security and some form of recognition that the Kurds have a right to self-defense and don't simply have to surrender to the Iranians or to the Damascus regime or to anyone else trying to destroy their culture and their lives.
You just mentioned the Iranians. One of the factors the American officials have been talking about whether U.S. should stay in Syria to encounter Iranian influence. Do you think this should be something U.S. be doing with Syrian Kurds, with Turkey, or should not be doing at all?
I really wish we would do it with Turkey. I think that it's in Turkey's national interest not to allow the Iranians to build this southern corridor across Syria and from Iraq to Lebanon and strengthen its position there. It would, of course, further destabilize Syria in the long run. It has already brought the Israelis into the war, and it can't possibly be a positive for Turkey. If the Iranians continue to increase their influence in Iraq, something the U.S. opposes, and which I hope Turkey would oppose, then that's another basis on which we could cooperate. The Iranians are the only power left in this civil war that wants to keep fighting. They are the power that wants the Turks to leave Syria. They are opposed to the way the Russians have handled the Turks in the peace process. So there's every reason for Ankara and Washington to find a way to work together to deal with Iran.
My final question, Ambassador. Yesterday, Pastor Brunson, American Pastor Brunson, after about 18 months in jail for the first time, faced a judge. And the trial or next hearing will be on, I believe, May 7th. What do you make of American pastors' imprisonment in Turkey, and how do you put his imprisonment in Turkey in context of Turkey since the failed coup attempt?
Well, the minister appears to be a hostage to Turkish demands on the U.S. He lived peacefully in Turkey for many years. He was a member of the community. He caused no problem. He was picked up on a charge of cooperating with terrorists, which is something that was used to cover charges against hundreds of thousands of Turkish citizens after the failed coup. And it seemed to be related both to Fethullah Gulen and the extradition issue, and it seems to be related to the Zarraf case in New York and to the case of Mr. Attila, whose sentencing is due next week. So it really looks to be like a form of hostage taking, and it's really, really cutting into and hurting the opinion of the American people about Turkey. And I hope that that would be a factor in Turkey's process of deciding how to deal with the United States, the U.S. Congress, which appropriates all our money, and the president in moving toward a form of resolution for the issues that we face.
Ambassador Pearson, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a very insightful Very useful conversation. We are looking forward to speaking in the future again.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.